And now it's time for some real talk.
Real Talk with Mark Ramsey.
Real Talk with Mark Ramsey.
Here we go again. Mark and Mike telling you what they think, even when they're not really thinking. Welcome to It Doesn't Take a Genius.
Ramsey is my name, and I apologize for being here without Mike and for the incredibly annoying theme music that we have, Real Talk with Mark Ramsey. But hey, Mike and I weren't able to connect for a couple weeks, and so I'm recording some extra episodes on the fly. And this one is near and dear to my heart. It came up on a podcast that I recorded with Robert Bortons for Refining Rhetoric. We'll link to that in the show notes. And it's funny because I was doing some research for this topic, and I went on YouTube and I said, maybe somebody's actually covered this before. And doggone it, if it wasn't a short from my recording with Robert Bortons that actually popped up. So I want to talk to you today about dignity and excellence. I am wearing a Porsche shirt. That is one of the things we wear when we're at the front of the room for the Porsche Academy, the brand ambassador program. And I love the fact that Porsche is a German company for a couple reasons. One reason is that, to be frank about it, I think they make some of the best cars in the world. And for another reason, it's German. The Germans, you know, the Germans and the folks north of them, they're barbarians, right? They were the barbarians to the Romans. And so the Roman system used the Greek educational system and took over the world, including where the barbarians lived. And the barbarians adopted a lot of their habits and customs and education and joined Western civilization. And to this day produce, some of the best technology ever produced ever, including technology that is extremely beautiful to look at. How did that happen? Well, I've said many, many times that I think Western civilization is special, and it's partly because of Western civilization's education system, what we call today classical education. And I think there are two elements of it that are important for anybody who's wanting to grow a business as successful as Porsche. And those two elements are excellence and dignity. I want to talk to you about excellence and dignity. Let's start by just really defining what I'm saying here. When I say excellence, I'm talking about something that we strive for and earn. And when I talk about dignity, I'm talking about something we have and cannot be taken away from us. All right, so I've got a little list here, a little cheat sheet. Excellence, the Greeks originally would have defined it as arete. And what they meant by that was, this is something I did and accomplished that is worthy of honor. Dignity comes from a Latin word, basically dignitas, which means worthy. So in other words, there are some things we do that earn honor. And then there are some things we are that are to be honored because they are worthy in and of themselves. We have inherent worth. We have inherent worth. So on the one side, you could almost say that it's about truth. You know, I strove for it. I tried to do something really impressive and I succeeded, and so I'm worthy of honor, and I get awards and I get accolades, and I do things that cause people to respect me, respectere, which means to look back upon, right? You're worth a second look. But there are other things that are just true about me being a human. I am inherently worthy, not because of anything I did, but just because of who I am. I think I've said on the podcast many times that that's about me maybe being made in the image of God, right? I reflect the very image of God if Genesis 1 and 2 are correct. And just the fact that I reflect God's image means I'm worthy of being treated with dignity, being honored for that reflection of God. I'm going to try to walk and talk, and we'll see how this works out for me. You might look at the differences between these two terms in how they were celebrated in ancient times. All right. You could look to the Iliad and to a story in the Iliad about a man named Thersites who was a soldier who was ugly and misshapen and deformed, and he was rude, and he was insolent, and he mocked the soldiers, and specifically Odysseus. And Odysseus gave him what for, and said, "You're out of line, and that's inappropriate." And then he hit him across the back, his misshapen back, with a mace, and caused the man to literally tear up. It hurt so bad. And the other soldiers applauded, because Odysseus was worthy of honor. He had done many things. He was very clever, a good soldier, one of their sharpest tactical minds, and he was worthy of honor because he had done some great things. He was excellent. But then there are other places in ancient literature, and you mainly have to go to, I believe, the Old Testament. You have to go to not Greek and Roman times, but to the Israelite tribe, and talk about hospitality. Everyone who comes to your door is worthy of being treated well. The widows and the orphans and the aliens who come amongst you are worthy of being treated as well as anybody else in the social welfare system and in the courts. And this happens over and over again, that when Israel violates this, it's a huge, huge problem. So that's not a political conversation. Their political and religious system was completely different to what we have today, but those people were worthy of dignity. They were worth something and worth being treated well. Now, full disclosure, there probably would be folks who quibble with me on this, because they would say, well, the ancient Greeks had this term, great-souled, people who were magnanimous and did the right things. But I don't think that's the same thing of what we're talking about here as dignity, as everyone was worthy of honor. And I could probably back that up by pointing out how many civilizations, all of them by my count, had slavery. It was okay to demean, force others, to treat them as if they were not worthy of basic respect and honor. We violated dignity all the time across the globe in almost all cultures. I bring up slavery very specifically because I think that's one of the tells that the Western civilization system must have something going for it. Look at all the times in Western civilization where we have self-corrected, where we have said, well, we said we are believers in X, Y, and Z, but we don't seem to be honoring it. So you could look at William Wilberforce and how he effectively, because of his Christian convictions, said, wait a minute, this doesn't seem to line up. This slavery thing doesn't seem to line up with how we actually believe. And because of our Christian convictions, let's end the slave trade. Eventually, that abolition movement makes it to America, and by the time you get to the end of the Civil War, there have been all sorts of opportunities for dignity, and we could talk about Lincoln, but let's talk about Appomattox. Let's talk about the surrender moment in Virginia, and the strict orders that the Union soldiers were under, that they were not to cheer or jeer or do anything that at all mocked the losing side as they marched in. If you ever visit the site, there are lots of eyewitness accounts of how the Confederate soldiers were just amazed at how they were treated with such respect, with such dignity. One of the things that happens is that Lee realizes in the room when they're signing the actual surrender that there's an American Indian on staff with the Union Army, and he says, well, at least there's one real American in the room. And this American Indian Union soldier says, General, we are all Americans today. That brotherhood, right? We're united on this. There's something in this where whether you're the winner or the loser, you are going to be treated with dignity. Something very special about that. We could talk about how that played out as you go forward. Look at Booker T. Washington. I know I talk about him a lot on this podcast, but I love the guy. Here's a man who was born a slave, and literally, as his autobiography says, went up from slavery, right? Here's a man who went up from slavery and could have demanded that he be treated with dignity, and was treated with dignity by some of the folks who taught him and so on. But the genius of Booker T is that he didn't stop at dignity, but went on to excellence. He said, wait a minute, all these white people that we're going to be living around, it's not going to be enough to demand that we be treated with dignity. We're going to have to do something with excellence so that we are of value to this community. And so he has the famous Atlanta Exposition speech where he sort of argues for that and says, let us work. He starts the Tuskegee Institute where he trains them to work, and they become so valuable to their community. It wasn't dignity that was so much the thread for him, it was excellence that he wove into the equation. We could go on and on, right? The Americans helped rebuild Europe with the Marshall Plan. The Americans helped rebuild Japan by sending MacArthur there after we had bombed them to help rebuild their economy. And of course, coming with MacArthur was Dr. Deming, the famous Dr. Deming, who created a whole system based on statistics, on quality, on getting things right, doing things in a way that were completely accountable to high standards. And the Japanese said, yeah, let's take that and run with it. And we have, to thank for it, modern manufacturing methods and process improvement methods and quality initiatives. And we could talk specifically about companies like Toyota. I recently got to do some work with Mazda, where, man, you could just tell the vibe in the room was we're going to treat people like everybody really does count, like they really do matter. I have told the story on this podcast about somebody I know who said, you know, things got worse when the white man took over at Toyota, and they improved when the Japanese, it wasn't about the race, it was about the Japanese instilling the Japanese system, the Toyota production system that treats everybody as a valuable part of the machine and seeks their input. Those are just a few of the examples of how Western civilization has continued to weave together back and forth, not just the dignity of every single person involved, that they're all worth something, that they all count, but excellence, and expects excellence and lets excellence rise to the top. People are important and truth is important. It's not just that we are something that's worthy, but that we do things that are excellent. We do both things in Western civilization. Well, you may have noticed that my last examples involve Japan, which is kind of Eastern and not Western civilization. But I bring it up because, you know, the Japanese, in many ways, Toyota probably specifically, figured out the code, right? They cracked the code, and places like Detroit paid the price. We didn't crack the code. We had issues with labor unions and so on. I say that with love. But I think there is a lesson here for all of us in what does it look like? What does it look like to really honor dignity and excellence at the same time? So I've got kind of a list. I've just been kind of going over some notes here, and I'm going to read them to you just to give you a flavor of this. But I think what it looks like when you honor excellence is you do keep score. It's important, right? It's important to know the numbers. It's important to know what actually happened and to be accountable to that, right? That there are numbers that we're accountable to. And then to recognize people for that, to recognize departments and groups and individuals for their contribution. That's respect. That is looking at them a second time, as I said earlier. Respectare. It's clarity, right? We are not going to pull any punches. We are going to tell people exactly what we think about what's going on and make sure they are plugged in so that they know the score and can perform accordingly. It's what Patrick Lencioni calls passionate, unfiltered debate, right? We're going to have meetings where we argue about things and wrestle to the truth of what they are. The ancients would have called that dialectic. Dialectic, as in we are going to dialogue back and forth until we get to the bottom of what this is. It's about standards. Right? It's about having standards that we keep. It's about having reviews where we check on our performance. All of those things honor excellence. Well, at the same time, we need to honor dignity, right? We need to honor dignity. So what's that look like? Well, dignity involves listening. It involves empathy. It involves expressing gratitude just for the fact that somebody is a part of the team. And it's not personal. This is interesting, right? You'd think that the opposite of excellence being dignity, the opposite of passionate, unfiltered debate would be, brushing stuff under the rug because it's not a big deal. Well, that's not true. What's actually true is that we're just going to make sure that it's not a personal attack. In fact, if we did brush it under the rug, that would not honor somebody's dignity at all because we're not telling them the truth, right? Clarity is kindness. We say that all the time on this podcast. We've talked in our discussions on the podcast about the positive discussion questions that Mike compiled. It's a great little technique of just having a check-in with somebody and finding out who they really are as a person. And that honors the fact that they're worth something just because they're somebody. You'll notice that there's a thread through both of those. I said clarity is kindness. Kindness to me is the word, right? Kindness honors both sides. That's why the coach approach is so powerful, because it's a kind way to say, hey, I'd like to meet you where you're at as a human being, but I'd like to help you get to the next place. I'd like to help you strive for that next rung on the ladder to where you can be more excellent. Well, it'll be really cool to find out exactly how much dog barking and leaf crunching you can hear on these videos, but I had to record it outside, so I'm going to keep going. I've got to talk about Jesus because he's probably the example, the linchpin of why this system works, dignity and excellence. The Roman Empire, it's one thing for the Greeks and Romans to conquer the world. It's quite another for that whole system to be turned inside out and the Holy Roman Empire to be what takes over from the Roman Empire. That's maybe a silly example, but the system became a Christian system, right? Jerusalem met Athens and Rome, and everything changed. Jesus in Scripture is, you could probably read the last third of all four Gospels as basically revolving around the Jewish leaders approaching Jesus and saying, hey, we got to test you. Let's see if you really are perfect. Let's see if you really do cover all the requirements. Let's see if you really are accountable. And across the board, Jesus always wins those conversations and those tests. But at the same time, Jesus is not just excellent, because if it stops there and he's excellent and we're not, according to Scripture, we're condemned, right? We don't measure up. But instead, Jesus, as he pursues his ministry, does things like touch lepers. He meets with women. He goes into the houses of those who at the time had no social standing and in fact maybe were pariahs of some kind. He wasn't just a man of excellence, but a man who honored dignity. And so it makes perfect sense that such a man would say, well, while you were yet sinners, I died for you. And he sacrifices himself on the cross on behalf of other people, right? It's love, right? I think that's really the summary of everything that I'm talking about. In our day and age, it's easy to say that we live in a system that's based on power, that's based on possessions. And I think Western civilization at its core, when it's really honoring what its true DNA is, says that the system is about truth and about love. That's what the system is. The system is about truth and love, which I would argue are the same thing, Jesus. Well, speaking of Christ, I can hear some of you now saying, for God's sake, Mark, get to the point. What are we talking about here? Well, I apologize because I get excited about these ideas, but I need to get to the practical application. So here's what I think it is. If you want a culture as successful as Western civilization, I think you have to honor both dignity and excellence. I think as humans, we tend toward one or the other, and I think that's probably true for organizations and teams as well. And so you might need to ask yourself, which is the growth opportunity for you? I'll use as an example something we've talked about many times on the podcast, which is Crucial Conversations, the excellent book. The book talks about how some people tend toward violence and some people tend toward silence when they have unresolved conflict. Now, I'm not talking about the passionate, unfiltered debate we talked about earlier that really, truly honors excellence and doesn't make personal attacks, that really honors dignity. What I'm talking about is when we withhold information, right? That's silence. Maybe I withhold information because, I think I'm honoring your dignity, right? Because I'm saying, I don't want to hurt their feelings, and let's just go along, and I'm going to mask my words and sugarcoat, and maybe some of it leaks out as sarcasm, but in general, I'm just going to avoid whole topics that really we need to talk about, right? So it's bad to tend towards silence and honor false dignity. Honestly, it's what Lencioni calls artificial harmony. That might be the extreme that you tend toward, or maybe you or your team or your organization tend toward violence. Right? You say we've got this figured out. We've got the numbers. We know what's right. We know who's doing the best. And if you're not the lead dog, you don't matter. And we might spell that out in a number of ways. And I'm not really thinking pay plans. I'm more thinking how we recognize people, what we honor, how we make sure we're hearing from the bottom. And that's the thing is if you're smart, like Toyota, you hear from the bottom. You hear from the folks who are where it happens, as they say. So that's just one example of how you might sort of figure out which is my growth opportunity. One more thing about Christ. Psalm 85:10 says, "Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other." So we've got mercy, and we've got peace, and we've got truth, and we've got righteousness. Jesus is the total package, I would argue. And the question is, which of those two extremes do you tend toward yourself? And which one would your organization be more effective if it honored? That's what I got to talk about today. And now I'm going to shut up and let a certain someone take us home. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Let us know how you think. We'd love your likes, your subscriptions, and your sharing. Thanks, guys.
Mark and Mike, they met on the line with Ford and GM, stars did align. Two sharp minds with a vision so bright. In the world of business, they took flight. Mark loves the classics, Greeks on his mind. 4 kids at home, a coach so kind. Mike's quick wit can cut through the noise, making the complex clear with poise. On the road to leadership, we walk together, building bridges, facing stormy weather, guiding young souls through the twists and turns. In the podcast of life, there's so much to learn. Now they're on air in a digital stream, helping young leaders chase their dream, talking about play.